an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Blackflame Chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. In these chapters, we get to see some of the beginning of Jailong's plan, and we get to see a new perspective in the story, which I'm always a big fan of. Cassius is interesting. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. So I wanted to just say something right out of the gate, which is I don't go into books really with an idea that I want things to be. I don't have a preference. In other words, are there multiple perspectives? I don't know. I don't care. Are we third person, first person? I don't know. I don't care. Are we present tense, past tense? I don't know. I don't care. I don't really have any particular affinity for any of these things above others as a rule. However, when we're looking at this sort of story, I really believe multiple perspectives is the only way to go. And this is part of the reason. I was just listening to a live broadcast from the Overdo Boys. Those of you who don't listen to Overdo, it's a book club podcast, very funny. And they were talking about the Hunger Games and how it really, as a whole, that story suffers from being solely from Katniss's perspective. Katniss is, she's not a terrible character, but she's a very limited character. And there are certain things that you can't take advantage of, narratively speaking, if you are limiting yourself to that one person's viewpoint and understanding of the world. And I think that for this story, finding out, first of all, we started, of course, with just Lindon's perspective. Now we've jumped to Jailong's. We've jumped to Ethan's. So Cassius, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, will be number 4. Have we ever been... We have been in Yerin's perspective, actually, now that I think about it, because we have seen her, remembering her past and being really worried about the way that Lindon may potentially abandon her. But I don't think that we have really been in her head recently. Maybe not for this book. I might be wrong about that. But I just think that having multiple perspectives, it's really easy to see it as a device for showing you different plot elements of a story, but it's so much more than that. It gives you an idea of who a character actually is versus who they see themselves as. At least if you are a good writer, I think a lot of your narrators are going to be unreliable or just biased in their way. They're going to be limited. Lindon, as we have seen, is deeply limited because of the history of his clan and the misinformation that they have fed him as he got older. The misinformation that they fed him about himself, about the ways in which levels worked and what was possible, what was considered average and not. And Ethan it's really fun to be in his head, because what's so very unusual about Ethan is that I think versus all the characters we've seen so far, Ethan is the most true to his appearance to everyone else. What everyone sees when they look at Ethan, as far as I can tell, is exactly the truth. Ethan doesn't try to hide who he is. That's not to say that he doesn't have, ulterior motives. We find out later this section, I think that he's trying to set Lindon up to do this fucking Blackflame, what's it called, technique with the fire that wound up like eating most of them from the inside out. And he didn't tell anybody about that. So this is not to say that he just doesn't lie at all or hide things. But in terms of who he is, I think he's the most transparent, which is really, really interesting. I wonder if that will change based on seeing more of what he does, seeing more of the way that other people see him. But there is an attitude that he has that is a perfect foil for somebody like Cassius. When we wind up in Cassius's head, it turns out Cassius fell in love with somebody and wound up essentially sacrificing his position so that he could be with the woman that he loves. And Ethan took his place and was the one that sort of vouched for this woman and convinced his family that he should be allowed to be with her. So Cassius is in a very interesting predicament where he still sort of is resentful of the fact that Ethan has taken his place. He knows that's where I'm supposed to be. At the same time, he's still so very happy and so in love with this woman. At least that's the vibe that I'm getting, that he doesn't regret giving it up at all. It's not like he looks back and is like, well, that was a mistake. No, it's simply he resents having to be put in the position where he had to give it up. That's fair, you know? And this has led to this strange relationship where he is indebted to Ethan for backing his wife and vouching for her, and he knows that he owes his present happiness to Ethan. On the other hand, Ethan took his place, and as he describes Ethan, he calls him the clan's delinquent underlord. This makes me feel he believes that he would have done a better job. That is not to say that I believe he thinks he would be more powerful than Ethan, because it seems not. And I am extremely curious why Ethan has ascended as quickly and as well as he has. Is it natural talent? Did he do something shady? Is there potentially some secret history that we don't know about? But Cassius clearly sees himself as the person to rein in Ethan. So my previous impression when Cassius arrives of him essentially just tolerating Ethan and finding it a little bit irritating seems to be correct. There is some affection there. There is some respect. There is some gratitude and a feeling of obligation. But there's also a lot of frustration. And this thing that he has set up, he being Ethan, has set up with Lindon, Cassius very nearly tries to blow it in order to save Lindon, because he seems to be pretty convinced Lindon's going to die with whatever it is that Ethan has planned. And that, to me, points out that this is a person who is totally willing to do the right thing, whether or not he's maybe going to be seen by others as abdicating or at least neglecting his duties. Ethan is his underlord, and he was willing to squeal on him. That, to me, is pretty valuable information. You know, Ethan stops him with very little effort, I might add. And yeah, one could say he could give it another try, but we don't get that far in this section. He may give it another try. It might not be the last time he attempts to warn Lindon. And I just find this reveal to be very compelling, because I didn't think about Ethan's choosing Lindon's iron body for him. It seems that everyone else seems to sort of feel that Ethan gave Lindon this body. Like, he saw several steps ahead and put Lindon into the position where that blood forged body was going to be the only option for him. And Lindon, as I did, seems to trust that this was circumstantial. He's sort of, I think, taking for granted, like, he was trying to train me and get me to level up. And in the position that I wound up, there was really no other option that would allow us to get out of there alive and for me to survive. So I just happened to wind up with this one option, which was best for me. But it seems like both Yerin and Cassius they can tell Ethan has something up his sleeve and that this isn't an accident. Ethan sees too far ahead. He is able to, he's aware of too much for anything that he is involved with to have been unplanned. That's not to say he can't be taken by surprise. We do see this section that he is taken a little bit by surprise, but I just think that this is all very interesting because Lindon is so much less suspicious than everyone else is. And he, in that regard, I share that with him, not because I am so trusting, but because I don't feel like I have a good grasp on how much Ethan can see, how much he can observe. And I also don't really, I don't know enough about an iron forged body to have perspective on how unusual this is. Like, Yerin has to point out this time how very different his iron forged body is. It's just not average. And he keeps on doing things and taking for granted because he doesn't know any better, that this is how an iron body normally behaves. And she has to be like, dude, no, this is really unusual. And I think that is part of what worries her, is that he's obviously gone in a direction that she didn't think was like possible potentially. And it is, as Cassius says to Ethan when they are talking alone, he says this kid's body is so far outside of what he can handle that it's like giving a toddler an incredibly sharp sword. And he's just going to wave it pointlessly around and probably hurt himself more than he hurts anybody else because he does not know what he's doing and has no control. And to hear that, I mean, I'm in the position that Lindon is. I don't know anything. I don't have any frame of reference or context for a lot of this stuff. So I have to trust that when Lindon's like, oh, my iron body did this thing, which I'm sure Yerin can also do. I totally am like, oh, okay, so Yerin can do that. That's cool. And it's not until she's like, dude, I can't do that, that I'm like, oh, word? Really? So all this to say, the multiple perspectives is really, it's fascinating because of the way that it handles the rules of this universe. World building is something that is often treated as like and depending on the story, it can be sort of a backdrop. There are plenty of universes in which the rules are sort of secondary to what's going on with characters. And in this, I would say it's a very character-driven story, but the rules are extremely important. And realizing that some people don't know how the rules work and can thus be taken advantage of really easily or promise things, that is extremely important as well. And I can't help but wonder how much of the rules Will White had planned out and how much he sort of like created as he went along and then dropped it in as if this had always been true. This is always something that I wonder about authors in general. How far ahead do they plan? You know, I think a lot of authors will take credit for having planned way ahead when I don't necessarily believe that they did that. And they are just trying to make it seem as if they had more of a handle on the universe they built than they actually did. But in Lindon's case, having him be so inexperienced, that is a really great place to start as an author so that you can continue to build and just have it be, oh, but the character's discovering this. I'm discovering this as the author, but we won't talk about that part, you know? So anyway, okay. Why won't my Kindle open? I just had it on the page. Damn it. All right. Well, I know where it starts. So chapter 4 begins, and I had said this already, that I really was mad about having to stop reading last time because, spoilers, we get to see Jai Long take this whole like gathering down. It's a portion of his clan, just a small portion. And there is a moment later on where, because it is such a small group, he could potentially then leave, walk away at this time and not really risk anything. It would be sort of like, oh, he went nuts and killed this one like small group of the Jai clan. Maybe it doesn't even really like there may never be like a real certainty about who did it if he doesn't leave anybody. And he fades into obscurity with his sister and everyone sort of forgets about them. But I have to say, I was really moved, and I said this last episode, at the loyalty of the Sandviper clan to him. That said, this section really reminded me, I was so moved at the fact that they were going to be 100% willing to stand by and watch him murder tons of potentially totally innocent people in cold blood. I think that when I was thinking about what this would look like, the fact that he was going to be murdering some of his own family, I was expecting it to be the Jai clan was going to be the core family that he knew, the top tier people that he was related to. And I don't think I fully understood that it was going to be everybody in the clan, which that's a real different situation, kids. You know, I mean, it's not like I was happy about him murdering his own family. I understand where he's coming from and his bitterness about it. I don't endorse it. But then seeing that he's out here just like dragging people who are maybe not even totally aware of who he is. Probably they are. He seems pretty famous, so I'm going to assume they at least know who he is. But they didn't necessarily have any hand in him being exiled by his family. That was hard to watch. You know, that was a difficult, I don't know. I just wasn't quite ready for that the way that I expected to be. So the scene goes on with him like having these people dragged in front of him. That was another part of it that I don't think I was fully ready for. I was expecting him to go in and sort of have an Anakin Skywalker moment of like just a solo murder mission. But what he has the Sandvipers do is just drag people out to him. And then he just stabs them through with this spear. And it's a moment of like, the coldness of it was just really, it was methodical because he isn't prepared to use his spear in a fight yet. He doesn't know what it's going to do. And for some reason that also was like upsetting to me. It's one thing for somebody to die with an opportunity to defend themselves, you know, not that anybody would really be able to stand against him because he is so advanced, but it's another thing for somebody to be, you know, held in front of him like an animal that's going to be slaughtered and just has nowhere to go and no options. So Let's see. Let's see. Sandviper Gokren vanished from Jai Long's side in the same instant, and he was standing next to the beam of light as another Sandviper stumbled away. The Elder's technique scorched a line in the dirt instead of skewering the Sandviper through the chest, as expected of a true gold. Before Jai Long had even shouted a warning, Gokren had sensed the attack coming, determined the target, and pushed the man aside. So I loved this, getting to see Gokren in action. He isn't as advanced as he wishes he was, but he's still really fucking lethal. And we also have these fucking bats that keep on getting in the way. And at one point, Jai Long like forgets about them and fails to factor them into his attack. And they wind up like causing some damage because he didn't think that part through. And I enjoyed that, especially the fact that we get to see Jai Long fuck up a little bit. He is so focused and so intent on his goal that it's weakening him in some ways because he has this obsession. And it's interesting to see how that sort of turns around a little bit later and how he seems to realize that about himself. And that is part of what makes him consider giving up on this whole idea and running off with his sister, because his sister is trying to suggest later on that they just go away. This is something that was mentioned at the end of the last book as a potential possibility. They go off. She winds up meeting somebody and having a life and having children, and he dies alone, essentially. And he really considers it here. But he says something to her about taking revenge for Krall's death. And that sort of stiffens her resolve as well. And she tells him that she's going to come along. It's pretty clear that he had not planned to bring her. And initially, he isn't real keen on the idea and tries to dissuade her. But she tells him, I know it's going to be hard. And if you hear me complain at all, you can absolutely leave me behind. And I don't think that's empty words. I think she literally means that. If I am any trouble at all, just go ahead and leave me behind. But back to this scene, there is this elder who completely ignores Jai Long entirely in favor of speaking to Chief Gokren. And even when Gokren kind of inclines his head towards Jai Long and is like, talk about this guy, the elder refuses to look at him, to speak with him. It is a purposeful insult because this dude is so certain that they are about to level these people that he has no interest in pretending that to be on like respectful terms with Jai Long. So we're in the territory of our branch family. Word of what happens here will reach the Underlord, and the chief knows that. And Jai Long is standing there looking at Gokren, who is about to absolutely level this guy. And yet Jai Long is still like, I can't believe this dude's about to fight on my behalf. Seriously? These are my enemies. I cannot understand this. Like, it's such a beautiful moment, again, of him just, he constantly thinks, they aren't going to have my back. They aren't going to do it. And I'm realizing more and more, Jai Long is like Yerin. Jai Long has been pushed down this, like, dark path. It's a different situation because with Yerin, it was purposeful. She was put through hell very specifically to train her. Jai Long was put through hell very specifically because his family doesn't give a shit and are bad people. But they are both extremely prepared to be on their own and have to fight on their own for everything. And do not expect anyone to really have their back, like when push comes to shove. And Yerin keeps being surprised that Lindon wants to stay with her, wants to be a package deal with her. And now we see Jai Long over and over again being surprised that the Sand Vipers are on his side. And this comes up at the end of the scene. He eventually winds up like crumpled on the ground because this spear takes in Madra. But it turns out occasionally it's too much, Madra. Like, he didn't see how, I won't say crippling because that implies that it's permanent, but I think that he just didn't realize how intense the experience was going to be. And by the end of things, he's like a shaking mass on the ground. And he believes for sure that Gokren is going to steal the spear from him. And it looks like he may. He takes it away and puts it in the case. And it sort of all looks like he's about to saunter off into the sunset with it. And then he gives it back to Jai Long and it's like, you're going to need this. It's time to go. And it's just he also like sort of laughs at the fact that he can see Jai Long doesn't trust him. And I wonder how much Gokren takes offense at that and how much he's just like, well, that's because of his fucking trauma. Because Gokren seems to be more sensitive than I would have expected. And I get the feeling that he kind of understands why Jai Long is behaving this way. And so I don't think he fully blames him for it, which is really, he's giving him a lot of grace there. And that also is part of what makes this so touching, is the fact that Jai Long keeps being proven wrong, that they aren't going to be on his side, and they keep on aggressively proving themselves and then not really being like offended at the fact that they've had to do that yet again. So I love this moment where the Sand Viper chief goes up against the Jai Elder and they have to move their fight to a whole other area because their fight is about to be so fucking epic that they can't risk their own people being caught up in it. So they like leap over these buildings and go into this whole other area. And the elder says to Gokren, your life is over. And Gokren says, my life ended 3 days ago. Oh, that's a good moment. It's a good moment. So here's the part where he hits somebody and gets this Madra, and let's see, but he had been reluctant to test out his spear in battle, but now it seemed he had no choice. Whether he liked it or not, he was about to have his questions answered. Most sacred artists Jai Long knew would have hesitated to fight someone a stage lower than they were. It was shameful and embarrassing, especially in public, but Jai Long had no pride. He didn't mind losing. The man's Madra leaked out visibly, spilling starlight and blood in equal measure, but his spear should have stolen some of that power. Had it worked at all? He didn't feel any. A rush of force slammed into his hand from the spear, flooding his Madra channels with white light, and he stumbled in his steps. This was only a fraction of the victim's full power, but it was enough to make Jai Long feel like his channels were about to burst. The next low gold thrust at him even as a second swept at his legs, and off balance there wasn't much Jai Long could do to stop them. A spearhead sliced his shoulder, and a shaft of solid wood hammered his shin. He fell onto the grass, pain flaring, but still gripped his weapon in one hand. Jai Long flooded his Madra into the serpent's shadow, sweeping his spear in an arc. He left a burning rainbow of white light between him and his opponents, which came to life as a snake thick as his arm. The living technique slithered to face his opponents, hissing. The snake seized a spear in its jaws, shearing the weapon in half. The head tumbled away, wooden shaft smoking. A Jai woman brushed her arm against the body of the serpent shadow, and she cried out, blood spraying from the cut. The light was sharper than the edge of a razor. Well then, that's pretty fucking dope. He watched them through watery eyes, his breath uneven, spirit straining to contain the energy he'd swallowed. The glowing lines on his skin pulsed unsteadily, flickering between too much energy and too little. Yeah, this shit is just not what he had expected. I don't know what exactly he had in mind, but it's clear this sort of inrush wasn't something he was particularly prepared for. And he winds up being saved by another sand viper in this moment again, like owing his life to somebody from that clan. And I'm not going to go beat by beat through the whole rest of the fight, but he winds up using as much of the Madra up as he can, cycling it as quickly as he can in order to make use of it, to make room for more. Because every time that he gets somebody in that way, like through the core, it's going to cause a rush like that. And let's see. White light stormed through his channels, tearing him apart as though he'd swallowed a razor-sharp flame. He tried to vent it from his skin wherever he could, white light spearing through him and leaving tiny bleeding cuts with every ray. He saw the remnant rise, only one. The bodies he'd cut with the ancestor spear remained still and quiet, but the single individual the sand viper had killed vented its remnant into the air. I love this again. This is a reminder that the remnant he's looking at is the one that he was supposed to have bonded with, because this was an elder, if things had gone a different way. And somehow this is incredibly heartbreaking to me for him to get a look at this thing. And it's also like rather beautiful. It says it looked like a constellation. Points of bright light formed joints, hands, eyes, and a heart, like stars floating in the air. Thin, faded lines connected those points until the spirit looked like a bent, hulking skeleton torn from the night sky. And he jams the spear into the ribcage. This power was nothing like what he'd stolen in battle. It flowed into him still and obedient, a gentle rain instead of a vicious flood. His core drank it up greedily until it strained against its limits, pushing to expand and contain this feast. And I can't help but wonder what kind of tragedy it will be to the Jai clan for them to lose a remnant that's like been in their family for so long. I feel like this is probably going to be kind of devastating, but I might be overestimating that, you know? So he winds up having to like send some Madra up into the clouds using like just searing light because he can't hold it all. And this is when Gokrin comes up on him and is just like, hey buddy, you all right? Cause we still have a lot of shit to do. And I just love how he says, you think I'm going to turn on you now after I pulled arms on the Jai clan for you? Gokrin picked up the case, slid the spear inside, buckled it close, and tossed it to the ground in front of Jai Long. Get some sleep, the sect chief said. We've got a long journey ahead. I feel bad for the Jai clan, man. I don't feel like they are ready at all. And I know I shouldn't root for Jai Long the way that I do, because I love Lindon, and he's going to be Lindon's enemy in a duel. But low-key, I'm rooting so hard for Jai Long because he's just very interesting. And I just want to know this is the thing that I suffer from a lot in books where I'm like, I know I should be rooting for like a better person, but this bad person's doing something that's really interesting that I know the good person probably would not try to do. So I just have this curiosity about, well, if you do this crazy thing, then what happens? That said, though, Lindon is doing some bonker shit as well. So he isn't less interesting at all, the way that often happens in these sorts of stories. So Lindon is attempting to practice this course and is frustrated at the fact that he isn't as fast as he should be. And Yerin comes in and sort of is teasing him a little bit. And she says that he hasn't been taking any rest the way that he should, and that the problem with an iron body is that it doesn't let you know that you're tired as quickly as a lower level body does. And therefore, you will push yourself much harder than you should in order to before you begin to feel the effects of fatigue. And he is sort of this opinion that this means, oh, I can just keep refreshing myself, and I'll get to that. And I can continue to push myself really hard without having to stop as often. And she has to be like, dude, no. Your physical body is only an aspect of your overall strength. And whether or not you feel tired, your spiritual self needs rest. You need sleep. You need to do all of the things that nourish yourself. And you aren't able to do that. It's physically impossible while you are constantly working and refreshing and working and refreshing. You can't look at it that way. Basically, he's not being holistic, you know? When she says something to him about the fact that he needs a break, he tries to argue that it hasn't been that long, but then when he looks at how low the candle has burned and he thinks about the number of times that he has stopped a cycle, he starts to realize oh, maybe it has been longer than I thought. So she says, if you ask me, you've got something shivered through Lindon's spirit, and he recognized the touch of her spiritual sense. Well, that's a puzzle and a half. He'd seen Yerin walk into battle with a smile on her face. Now, after scanning him, she was frowning and mumbling to herself, staring at his stomach. Though he had just toweled off, sweat broke out all over his skin again. What's wrong? What have I done? Did I cycle too much? Am I dying? You're about 1,000 miles from dying, she muttered, as expected of an underlord, I guess. Ethan? Did Ethan do something to me? He handed you that iron body, true? Unless I'm wide of the mark, it looks like it's been keeping you fresh. You could work your body until your core's dry. Excuse my ignorance, but isn't that normal? It's normal for the undying lizards of the Blue Fire Desert. I hear it's normal for some plants. People get tired sometimes. If you could work all day and night, you'd be fighting Ethan in a year, not one little jai long. The spirit needs rest just like your body does. You don't want to strain your Madra channels. I'll tell you that one for free. You're an iron, not a remnant. You need sleep, food. Your spirit's a weapon, and you've got to keep it clean and polished. But you don't have to worry about pulling a muscle or collapsing in a heap. I'd kill you for that if I thought I could take it off your remnant. Wow. That's a hell of a... He kind of was like... and it's clear that he isn't entirely confident that she's joking about this. And he's thinking about it and tells her, what are my chances? He wants to know her genuine opinion with Jai Long. Do I have enough time? And she says, you've got no time at all. Sleep or no sleep, if Ethan doesn't have something planned for you, then you're dry leaves to the fire. And he just sits there and stares for a second, and she gets embarrassed and is like, oh God, I'm sorry. I really did not mean to say it like that. But this is just, I don't know how this could ever be possible to accomplish. So it just came out. I'm sorry, but this is just, I don't see it. And Lindon says something about how he could potentially go after Jai Long in a shadier way than in a straight fight, and says I could poison him. And she says, there's always poison. Yeah, you could poison his food, then wait until he falls asleep, put a different poison on your knives, so even if he wakes up, he can't. And Lindon realizes that this is what they did to her master, and is just like, oh God, I'm so sorry. I didn't think before I said anything. And she's like, no, it's all right. But those people were pieces of shit. So I know you're better than that. Don't condescend to doing shit that cowardly people did. I know you're better than that. And Ethan comes in. Oh, I'm sorry. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Before they could respond, he added, I was just being polite. I heard it all. Oh my God. I love him so much, guys. He's so frustrating, but I really find him so amusing. And And he says there are sacred artists who can tell the future to varying degrees. It would make planning so much easier. Let's talk about our problems. The Jai clan has all but declared war on our family. And Yerin's like, all but? What do you mean? And he's like, well, the emperor would be forced to do something if it was an all-out war. But as long as they are able to make it seem like it's these little squabbles that they keep saying are settling like petty debts, the emperor can't really do anything. And Lindon immediately is like, oh, they're going to claim Jai Long. That's what you're worried about. And he's like, yeah, I think that he might. They still won't take him back, but once the duel is over, they can pretend he was one of them all along. He wins, they take the credit. He dies, we kill the Jai High Gold, and they'll use it as an excuse for open war. So Lindon's like, well, can't you tell them that you changed your mind about this duel in the first place? And Ethan's like, I really can't. I'm an underlord of a major family. I said a thing. Everybody saw me say the thing. I absolutely can't back off on it. The one thing that I could do is allow you to leave the family, and everything that you did would have no bearing on the Aurelius family. But it's pretty clear he is not going to do that. He says, if you stay, I will do whatever I have to so that you win, even if it kills you. I have every confidence that I can raise you to victory without destroying your future. I can't say you will enjoy the process, though, and I will catch you every time you try and run away. Which is, I have a suspicion that's a little bit prophetic. I think that he will absolutely try to run away. So Lindon says he wants some time to consider. Ethan is like, all right, well, we don't have a ton of time. So if you want to join us, you're going to have to hit us up before dawn because we're going to be leaving, and look for this building that has a bunch of clouds around the foundation. He bows and leaves, and Ethan sort of stays up all night wondering what he should do, oversleeps, and then wakes up absolutely flipping out because it's past dawn and he thinks that he missed them and that they left him behind. And he runs out of the barn, opens the door, and there is just all of this cloud stretching underneath him, and he almost falls off the side. And Lindon realizes that Ethan took him along, despite the fact that he didn't actually confirm. He says, I kept an eye on you after I left. I could tell you'd made up your mind, so when you didn't make it on time, I decided to drag you along. I really enjoy how relieved Lindon is. I'm glad that it does seem like he pretty much chose to be here, because there was a suspicion for a minute that they just like that when Ethan first said, of course you need time to think about it. I was kind of like, is he just saying that? And then he's just going to make Lindon come with him, whether or not Lindon has decided anything, because that feels like something he might do. But it seems more important to Ethan than I would have expected that Lindon fully agree to everything and be consenting and volunteering. So I like that. I appreciate that. So he's looking at the fact that this like cloud is carrying 2 buildings and 5 people, and is just like, how the fuck? And we wind up finding out later exactly how much Madra it takes to power this thing. And it's kind of insane. We also get a look at like exactly how much Madra Ethan is able to pour into it. And it's one thing for Lindon to be shocked, but Fisher Gesha is also shocked. She isn't prepared for this at all. And for her to be shocked, that is particularly alarming to me. When she has been taken by surprise by something, then I know that shit must be really unexpected. And I love too, she comes in and is obviously kind of seasick, basically. And she gets really defensive about the fact that she's seasick. But then because the way that he's looking at her, she thinks that he's sort of like laughing a little bit. And he comes up to her and says, did you choose to come along? He didn't want to say too much because Cassius and Ethan could hear him perfectly well, but he could too easily picture Ethan snatching up the soulsmith on a whim. She studied him for a moment, then reached up and patted his cheek. I must look like a disaster to have an iron worry about me. No, the Underlord told me to think about it, didn't he? Well, I did. I've lived my life among the Fishers, and it's been a long life. It's about time I see the wider world, perhaps bring something back. A little knowledge, perhaps. And I can't leave a half-grown cub to stumble around in the wilds on its own, can I? No, I can't. And Lindon gets all sort of overwhelmed and verklempt at the fact that it seems like she actually gives a shit about him. I can't tell how much of that is genuine. I think she does. I think it's beginning to she is beginning to have genuine affection for this kid, but I also wanted to believe that before, and she was very willing to throw him to the wolves when she needed to. So I got my eye on her. I don't trust her completely, I love this. Finally, Ethan is like, all right, so we're going to have a lot of time together. It'll take a month to reach where we're going. So we're going to put this training barn to good use. And Yerin says, you're finally bothering to teach us? Ethan hopped up to sit on the bar, taking another drink from his bowl. The question is, are you ready for me to teach you? He let that hang for a second and took another sip, then added, and the answer is, no, you're not ready. So I'm going to spend this month trying to prepare you. I love it. He's just like, I'm not even trying to play with you. That is not where you all are. So we're going to try and get you to the place where you eventually are. So he tells Yerin that she needs to work on that course and beat her previous time using only her gold sign. And she is very, very salty about this. As we see a little bit later, she winds up getting to the point where it looks like she manages this or is about to. But at first, the suggestion of this, she has a very defiant reaction. And this moment, he says, you think perhaps that I don't know what it takes to reach high gold? No, that's not. I'm the last one who would. You think you know better than I do? Which exercises will allow you to integrate your remnant skills and abilities into your own? If your master left you a more complete training regimen for you to follow after low gold, then by all means, use that. I didn't aim to say that, Underlord. He smiled. You're young, and I'm unaccustomed to explaining myself. I'll try to be clearer in the future, but do as I tell you. And she kind of is like, all right, this does seem like some shit that my master would have had me do, so okay. And he says the only difference is that you trusted him. Trust comes with time, and during that time, you will clear that course with your gold sign, or I'll tie you to a string and drag you behind the house like a kite. It's pretty good, honestly. I like this moment. I appreciate, too, him being like, you don't trust me yet, and that's fine. He doesn't blame her for that. He's not trying to say that as some sort of shortcoming on her part. He is like, of course you don't. Why would you? You barely know me. Eventually we'll get there. But for now, I'm going to need you to at least do what I'm telling you. And then he takes out this pill. And he tells Lindon that this is a 4 corners rotation pill that'll make your Madra easier to cycle and should take your second core to iron fairly quickly. So I had already asked this question when he says take your second core to iron fairly quickly. The whole thing with one core leveling up and the other not still really confuses me. I don't understand how Lindon was able to get one core up to copper and the other was still wood, but then he was able to get one core to iron and the other was still copper. Like, is it just that he pours most of the leveling up into the one core and some of it into the other, and that's how it, like, there's just not quite enough to manage to level both up, I think. But yeah, so he tells Lindon that doing that you will be able to take one per day. And I think it's Gesha who asks how much he paid for that pill. And he says 5,000 scales. And it turns out like one a day. I mean, he probably paid as much as like one of those bins of scales that Lindon saw in the mine for the supply of the pills that he has. This is just unheard of shit, you know? So, Cassius turned to Lindon. I personally rescued a girl who ran from his training into a place called the Thousand Beast Forest. She survived by hiding from two-headed bears. I found her crouched in a cave, dirty and bleeding, but she begged me to leave her rather than take her back to train. And I love this when he's like, oh God, that does seem a little bit harsh. Ethan's like, it was. I mean, I honestly should have put her through a lot more before she went out into that forest, because she would have been fighting them if I had properly prepared her and hadn't been so lenient. And Yerin's response is, if you don't feel like you're going to die when you're training, then you're doing it wrong. And everybody's sort of like, yep, yeah, except for poor Lindon, who's like, oh God. So then we go into chapter 6, and I kind of talked about this already, that conversation that Jailong had with his sister. There was supposed to be a hidden valley that occasionally emerged to trade with the outside. The inhabitants were weak but protected by a curse. Is this supposed to be Sacred Valley? Is that where he's talking about there? I'm not sure, because, you know, it's a valley west of the Desolate Wilds. That was what but I don't know if that's exactly where he means or if it's someplace else. So I'll kind of skip over this conversation because I pretty much had it already. And let's see. On the 4th day after they left, Sky's Mercy had to duck to the ground to let the constructs recharge. And we get a little bit of Lindon really trying to make the most of everything that he does in order to strengthen himself. He decides to not use Madra to make it easier to carry these huge things of water, and relies solely on the strength of the iron body that he has. And he really gets a quick awakening, because apparently cycling Madra to increase your strength is something that like children do automatically. So not doing that is quite a challenge, actually. And he arrived red-faced and sweating, limbs shaking. After 10 minutes of letting his blood-forged iron body restore his fatigue, he set off again. There's a moment in which he and Gesha and Yerin go to hunt down a remnant in order to, because they're still doing soul smithing and practicing this stuff. And he offers to take on the remnant himself, thinking that maybe he can handle it. They sort of raise their eyebrows, but they let him do it. And he winds up getting clobbered, and Yerin has to step in. And he realizes, as he's like wondering how the fuck that went so wrong, that even though he was able to survive in the pyramid, it wasn't by battling them. He had done a lot of like sneaky shit, but he never went toe to toe with any of them. So obviously he has a lot to learn. This is like kind of an easy kill for Yerin. It really doesn't take much effort on her part, but for him, the thing probably would have killed him. So, you know, I think that's a sort of a nice awakening for him, of just being like, man, I thought I was really advancing, but I keep forgetting about like the aspects of fighting that I haven't had to employ because I was so weak that was just not an option for me. So let's see. I'm trying to find. So there's a spot when Ethan fills the crystals, and everybody looks at each other like, "Are you serious?" And Gesha had confided in him later that she, a high gold, would have taken 4 or 5 days to fill up the circle. And let's see. Okay, there's the whole thing about his continuing to train on the actual course, and he's doing much better, actually. He's continuing to cycle and using these pills, but he can't cycle fast enough to use a pill a day. As it turns out, he's using like one every other day, one every 3 days. And Yerin, even though she's like much more advanced than him, is irritated at the fact that he seems to be doing better than her. But the thing is, like, she's so much further ahead that of course it's going to be slower going. It just doesn't seem like she really understands that, or it doesn't emotionally satisfy her. So she's starting to get kind of snarky with him because she's really like frustrated at her lack of progress. Gesha is teaching him about the different types of Madra, and they are studying the 7 most common ones. And I love that she tells him, you'll reforge each of these aspects into discs. And then, bring your discs to me, and if I approve them, we'll try forging them into needles. So Lindon, in true form, is like, you know what? Fuck the discs. I'm just going to do the needles right away. And he brings them to her once he's done, except that there is one that he isn't able to do. And he finally brings it and confesses that he can't do it. And she's like, no, you can't, because it's impossible. And I wanted to give you something impossible so that you would come to me and admit that you couldn't do it. And she says that, she looks at the needles and they're supposed to have been discs. And she's like, I had wanted to get you to think about your limitations, but apparently I didn't succeed in getting you to do that. So fuck me, I guess. At this point, Ethan comes in and teaches him a new cycling method. And this is a really I'm not going to get into the way the cycling method works. Suffice to say that we find out the method that he is teaching Lindon is really way out of Lindon's league. And Lindon doesn't realize that. He's, willing to do whatever it is that Ethan tells him to do. It's incredibly difficult. Lindon has trouble even remembering to breathe as he does it. And when Ethan goes outside, this is when we go to the perspective of Cassius. And I love too that Ethan's like, you probably want to not wear your parasite ring because that's going to make it really fucking hard. And Lyndon's like, all right, cool. And then he puts the fucking ring on and it's just like, I'm not going to get anywhere by doing the easy thing. So fuck it. And I was like, all right, you know what, Lindon? You're all right. So here we go to Cassius. Let's see. I'm trying to find the exact spot where they start this conversation. Cassius was born to be the patriarch of the Aurelius family. He was a direct descendant of the bloodline. His appearance and conduct were impeccable, and from an early age he had impressed everyone with his skill in the sacred arts. But none of that had been good enough for Jing's family before Ethan took his side. He'd traded away his position as patriarch's heir with a smile on his face, but the occasional reminder could still sting. And Cassius said, tell me when we're really close enough for you to guide our landing, please. Because it turns out that they are kind of bluffing a lot of the time about being as powerful as they are to impress people and make it seem like they don't really have many limitations. And one of Cassius's first tasks after Ethan's arrival had been to determine the limit of the Underlord's senses. So let's see. Over the months since departing the desolate wilds, he'd built up a certain curiosity. Now that the other 3 were asleep and the 2 children had both left the circle of wooden dummies alone, he had a perfect opportunity to indulge that curiosity. Ethan would know what he was doing, of course, but it was best to operate as though Ethan knew everything. Cassius pushed the door open, took 2 steps on cloud through the bitter cutting wind, and entered the repurposed barn. He finished in a few seconds, confirming what he suspected. And he goes back to Ethan and is like, so you're not trying to kill him. I really thought you were. And Ethan's like, no, of course I'm not. I'm trying to teach him quickly and brutally, but I'm not trying to kill him. And he says, that's a low gold course. I trained on something similar only a few years ago. And You're teaching a child to wrestle by locking him in a closet with a wolf. He had gotten to know Lindon over the past few weeks. The boy was earnest, quick, and almost entirely ignorant about the sacred arts. Cassius didn't want to see him hurt. Someone had raised him completely disconnected from the real world, and he needed a thorough, solid education. It would take years to prepare him with all the knowledge he needed to face society, especially as a representative of the Aurelius family. Their enemies would tear him apart if he weren't ready. And this is when Cassius starts to poke and prod and be like, look, he's a talented kid, but like, what's going on with this? And finally he gets Ethan to admit he says he's a mess. His blood-forged iron body takes too much Madra to sustain, and he's weak as it is. No matter how physically resilient he becomes, he's no more than half a sacred artist. Have I hit the mark? Imagine with me, will you, if he could restore each of those cores to full size and raise them to low gold. With pure Madra in one, he'd be a unique resource, and he could still follow a combat path in the other. That's 2 full cores, so he could bring out the full capabilities of the blood-forged body with energy to spare. And his second path is something that you haven't really thought about. When Ethan told him, Cassius was speechless for a moment. After a pause, he forced himself to start breathing. The Underlord was just needling him again to watch him squirm. Please don't worry me like that. I almost believed you. Then you were almost correct. He's not born of the Blackflame line. He couldn't handle the Madra. Didn't you wonder why I'd given him a top-grade blood-forged iron body? But you can't get him the aura, though, surely, unless you've tucked a dragon away in the... And all of a sudden he realizes that they are heading to Serpent's grave. And is like, no, we are not doing that. The Emperor is not going to let you do that. Which leads to one of my favorite lines. There's an old saying about asking forgiveness rather than permission, Ethan said. But the essence of it is, I'm going to do what I want. I swear to God, I cackled when I first read that line. Oh my God. So he starts to like yell to try and alert Lindon, because he really believes that this is going to go very bad and it's all going to like fall back on Cassius, because he says he'd suffered for Ethan's mistakes, taken the heat of the family's anger over Ethan's childish whims, hauled his family halfway across the empire to Serpent's grave, and then left them again because Ethan had wandered off. But even he had limits. So Ethan stops him from being able to actually like go and warn Lindon. And he just sort of gives up fighting. And it says there was no standing against an Underlord, as Lindon and the entire Aurelius family would soon realize. And I was like, well, damn. So we have a little like bit after this where it's Yerin and Lindon continuing to train, and they have a conversation about breaking down a remnant for parts and the ways in which you like include the sage into yourself. And she has some real like hang-ups over the fact that the sword sage, she thinks that the sword sage, first of all, I didn't realize that a sage is like more than an Underlord. Like he was probably even more powerful than Ethan is. But she seems to think because of that, his remnant is able to speak to her in a way that a normal remnant can't. And Ethan keeps trying to tell her, dude, I'm not mad at you, but you're imagining that. That's not how it works. And she won't really listen to him. And she kind of like goes up against Lindon at one point, sort of yelling about it, even though he isn't arguing with her. And he realizes pretty quickly that this is her just needing to vent. And let's see, he tells her, Underlords are fighting over you. It wasn't until this year that I could push an 8-year-old copper off his feet while you could carve your way through a mountain with a dull spoon. And she says, you don't have to polish me up, you know. And he says, I'm not polishing anything. The heavens opened up and showed me visions of all the greatest people on the planet, people who can wrestle dragons and strike down armies. Then they brought me to you. You're all so far above me, you might as well be stars. And it's a very vulnerable moment for him. And unfortunately, Ethan's listening, as he often is. And when he hears the heavens opened up, he gets this smile on his face and is really feeling like things are beginning to make sense. It's clear Ethan had suspicions about something. And I really want to know how much he knows or how much he suspected, what knowledge he has of the universe in general that led him to think this might have been a possibility at all. But yeah, so that is the end of the section, and I'm way over time, so I really need to stop. But thank you again, Andy, for commissioning this episode. Ms. T says that quote is an excellent postcard. It is. I don't tend to use quotes for postcards usually, but, and especially I wouldn't do it for this because nobody's listening to this other than I think 7 or 8 people. But, it is a really quotable moment. I really enjoyed it. So, all right, guys, I will be seeing you on Friday with a new episode. Friday, I believe, let me double check and make sure the time because I took most of Friday off. So it's going to be my only recording, and otherwise, 4 p.m. Central Time on Friday. So yeah, if y'all want to hang out with me again, do that, and I will see you then. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.